England, 1857. A darkness fell. Not night, but something far worse. A plague, swift and merciless, swept through the land. It began quietly in the shadows. Then it exploded. Death came to every town, every village. The sick burned with fever. Their skin, pallid and clammy, bore strange markings. Panic bloomed, as relentless as the plague itself. Doctors, overwhelmed and baffled, had no answers. This was no ordinary illness. This was something else. Word spread like wildfire, igniting fear and panic in every corner of the town. The once bustling streets now echoed with whispers and hurried footsteps, as if the very air carried the weight of impending doom. Carried on the wind of fear, the news reached every ear, every heart. The stormy skies mirrored the turmoil within the villages, their faces pale with dread, their eyes wide with terror. Ancient tales, whispered in hushed tones, rose to the forefront. Stories long buried in the annals of history were now spoken of as if they were yesterday's news. The old books and scrolls, covered in dust, were pulled from their shelves, their pages revealing secrets of a dark past. Tales of creatures of the night feeding on the living, tales of the undead. The graveyard, shrouded in mist, became a place of fear and fascination. Bats flying at dusk were no longer just creatures of the night, but harbingers of something far more sinister. The name Dracula slipped from trembling lips, a word heavy with dread. It was a name that conjured images of darkness, of blood, of an insatiable hunger that could never be quenched. The shadowy figure in the dark alley became a symbol of their deepest fears. Had the ancient evil found its way to England's shores? The arrival of ships at the foggy port brought with them not just goods and travellers, but the possibility of an ancient curse. The historical maps of England, now marked with ominous symbols, told a story of a land under siege. The symptoms, the swiftness of the plague, the strange markings, all pointed to something far more sinister than a mere disease. The doctors, with their old-fashioned attire and limited knowledge, could do little but watch as the plague spread with terrifying speed. It all pointed to a terrifying truth. The mysterious symbols, the creeping shadows, the unexplained deaths. It was all too much to be a coincidence. The villagers began to believe that they were not just fighting a disease, but an ancient evil. This was no mere disease. The empty streets, the deserted town, the images of plague doctors with their beaked masks, it all painted a picture of a place gripped by fear and death. The once lively town was now a ghost town, its inhabitants hiding in their homes, praying for salvation. This was the curse of the vampire. The old vampire lore books, with their tales of blood-sucking fiends and eternal damnation, became the villagers' only source of hope and fear. The eerie castle ruins at night, once a place of mystery and adventure, were now seen as the lair of the undead. The villagers knew that they were facing something far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. Fear, a venomous serpent coiled around the hearts of men. Sleep offered no escape, haunted by nightmares of fangs and blood. Every cough, every shadow, whispered of the plague's inexorable advance. The living became prisoners in their own homes. Streets, once bustling with life, stood eerily deserted. The sick were shunned, abandoned for fear of contagion. Distrust festered, turning neighbour against neighbour. England, once so strong, was brought to its knees by an unseen enemy. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Traditional remedies proved useless against this supernatural foe. People turned to ancient superstitions, seeking to protect themselves from the plague and the creatures it spawned. Graves became deeper. 6 feet, once deemed sufficient, was no longer enough. 8 feet, 10, 12 feet down into the earth, the dead were buried, as if trying to outrun the darkness that pursued them. But even the cold embrace of the earth offered little comfort. The fear remained. Section 5. Bound by iron. Iron, the metal of the earth, was believed to hold power over the supernatural. Iron spikes forged in the fires of fear were driven through the chests of the deceased. Limbs were pinned down, bound to the earth to prevent escape. The clang of hammer against metal echoed through the graveyards, a chilling symphony of desperation. Each spike hammered home was a desperate prayer, a plea for protection. Section 6. Stone and Superstition. In the heart of ancient lands, where the veil between the living and the dead was believed to be thin, Graveyards stood as solemn reminders of mortality. These graveyards were not just places of rest, but battlegrounds against the supernatural. Heavy stones, some bearing ancient symbols, were placed atop the graves. These symbols, often cryptic and mysterious, were believed to hold protective powers, warding off malevolent spirits. The weight of the stones served a dual purpose: to mark the final resting place and to prevent the dead from rising. These were not mere markers of grief, but barriers against the restless dead. The fear of the dead returning was pervasive, and communities took no chances. Each stone was a testament to the living's determination to keep the dead in their place, a silent guardian against the unknown. Religious icons, blessed by terrified priests, adorned homes and places of worship. These icons, often depicting saints and holy figures, were believed to offer divine protection. The blessings were not mere rituals, but acts of desperation, seeking to invoke the power of the divine to shield against the darkness. Garlic, potent and pungent, hung in doorways, its aroma a ward against evil. This humble herb was more than a culinary ingredient, it was a powerful talisman. The belief in garlic's protective properties was so strong that it became a staple in every household, a simple yet effective barrier against malevolent forces. The air was thick with the scent of incense, a desperate attempt to cleanse the land of its darkness. Incense, with its fragrant smoke, was believed to purify the air and drive away evil spirits. The act of burning incense was both a spiritual and practical measure, a way to create a protective barrier around the living. Every action, every ritual was driven by a primal need to survive. From the placement of stones to the hanging of garlic, each practice was a reflection of the community's deep-seated fears and their relentless fight against the unseen. These rituals, passed down through generations, were the lifeline of the living, a testament to their resilience and their unyielding will to protect their own. Ancient texts, filled with spells and incantations, were meticulously studied and recited. These texts were considered sacred, holding the knowledge and wisdom of ancestors who had faced similar fears. The words within were believed to hold power, a means to control and banish the supernatural. Community gatherings for rituals were common, with elders leading the ceremonies. These gatherings were not just about protection, but also about unity. In the face of the unknown, the community found strength in togetherness, each member playing a role in the collective defense against the supernatural. Under the moonlit sky, shadows seemed to move among the graves, a chilling reminder of the ever-present fear. The night was a time of heightened vigilance, where every rustle of leaves and every whisper of the wind was scrutinized. The graveyard, bathed in the eerie glow of the moon, stood as a silent witness to the community's unending struggle against the forces of darkness. Yet with each sunrise, there was a renewed sense of hope. The light breaking through the darkness symbolized the triumph of the living over the dead, a daily victory in the ongoing battle against superstition and fear. The graveyard, once a place of dread, became a symbol of resilience and the enduring spirit of the community. Section 7. The Undead Among Us. In the quiet cobblestone streets of ancient villages, whispers of the undead have long haunted the minds of the living. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land, an eerie stillness would settle in. The villagers, with their hearts pounding, would lock their doors and windows, praying for the dawn to come swiftly. Whispers turned to screams with the coming of the night. The once peaceful alleys became corridors of terror, where every rustle of leaves and every creak of wood sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to venture out. The air grew thick with fear, and the sense of impending doom was palpable. From the shadows they came. These were not mere phantoms of the imagination, but corporeal beings, twisted and malevolent. Their presence was heralded by an unnatural chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of the living. The fog that rolled in with the night only added to the sense of dread, obscuring the figures that lurked within, pale, gaunt figures, their eyes burning with unnatural hunger. These were the risen dead, souls trapped in decaying bodies, driven by a relentless need to feed. Their appearance was a grotesque parody of life, with skin stretched tight over skeletal frames and eyes that glowed with a malevolent light. The risen dead, their bodies twisted and corrupted, stalked the night. They emerged from forgotten graves and abandoned crypts, their movements slow but inexorable. Each step they took was a reminder of the thin veil that separated the living from the dead, a veil that had been torn asunder. They thirsted for the blood of the living, driven by an insatiable hunger. This hunger was not just for sustenance, but for the very essence of life itself. The blood they craved was a source of power, a way to sustain their unnatural existence. Their attacks were swift and brutal, leaving their victims drained and lifeless. Those who crossed their path met a gruesome end, drained of life, their bodies left to join the ranks of the undead. The transformation was both a curse and a contagion, spreading fear and death in its wake. The once vibrant villages became ghost towns, haunted by the spectres of those who had fallen prey to the undead. The line between myth and reality blurred. Stories that were once dismissed as mere folklore took on a terrifying new significance. The old tales of vampires, ghouls, and revenants were no longer just stories to scare children, but grim warnings of a very real threat. The nightmare had become real. Panic spread like wildfire, and the once tight-knit communities were torn apart by fear and suspicion. The villagers, once united in their daily lives, now turned on each other, desperate to root out the source of the terror. In the end, the true horror was not just the undead themselves, but the way they revealed the darkness that lay within the hearts of the living. Section 8, Echoes in the Mist. Years passed. The plague, like all things, eventually ran its course. The fever subsided. The dead ceased their nightly wanderings. England, battered and bruised, slowly began to heal, but the scars remained. The memory of that dark time lingered, a ghost story whispered around hearths. The fear etched deep within the nation's psyche refused to be forgotten. The Dracula plague, as it came to be known, had forever changed England. Section 9. A Nation Scarred. The practice of deep burials, bound in iron and stone, continued long after the plague subsided, a chilling reminder of the time when death was not an ending, but a transformation. The graveyards, once places of peace and remembrance, became symbols of a primal fear. Even now, centuries later, one can still find these graves scattered across the countryside, a testament to a time when England stared into the abyss and found itself reflected in the eyes of monsters. Section 10. The Legend Endures. The Dracula plague may be a distant memory, but the legend endures. A cautionary tale passed down through generations, reminding us of the darkness that lurks at the edge of our world. A darkness that can, at any moment, rise again. And so we remember the terror, the despair, the courage of those who face the darkness. We remember and we remain vigilant, for the night is always darkest, just before the dawn.